Welcome to In the Zone. I'm Craig Zimmerman. Sitting across from me today is an expert in the field of coaching and teaching. Bill Nesbitt, welcome.
I appreciate that. I'm not sure many people would agree about the expert, but certainly experienced in those two
There you
areas.
go. I was looking for a new word today because I was thinking, I've said to a few people and they're not comfortable with legend, so experience is what we're going to call it.
For me, that makes sense.
Okay. So, Bill, you were born and raised right here in this community.
No,
No?
no. I
Okay.
was raised for the most part in this community,
Okay.
but I was in a military family, so there was 7 kids, and my oldest sister was born in California, the next one in Tennessee, and then my next sister was born in, Bay City, then Tennessee, and then North Carolina, then Bay City, then me and my brother back down to North Carolina. So I was born in
Okay.
North Carolina, moved to Bay City. I went to 2 weeks of kindergarten in Bay City, and then my dad transferred to Selfridge.
Okay.
And then that's when we came down and took.
So kindergarten you came to St.
I
Clair.
came to St. Clair in kindergarten, and I think my oldest sister was probably in 6th or 7th grade by then.
Okay. So you were running around the streets of St. Clair
Oh
from a
yeah,
young
so I was
age.
raised here, not born here, but certainly raised here.
Okay. So your dad moved around. Now, you were probably young enough. You probably don't remember much of the moving.
I
do
don't
you?
remember much of
Okay.
that. I mean, I remember a little bit. I certainly remember a little bit of our houses in Bay City, and I remember a little bit in North Carolina when we just because you have these little visions of running around as a little kid, probably in diapers or shirts, and no shirts on, looking like a fool, which you do later, but now you have clothes on. So I remember that, but for the most part, my formative years I recall mostly here.
Now, did you folks live in any of the area down by Selfridge where they have housing?
We never did.
Okay.
When my dad, he had, like I said, he was a Marine during Vietnam, got out, and then he wound up segueing into the Air Guard. And so, after a few jobs, and they got in the Air Guard. But when he's transferred over to Selfridge, St. Clair is where they settled right away. He came down because they were not familiar with St. Clair, not from the area. They were kind of raised in the Bay City area. My dad went to actually Unionville before it was Unionville Sea Wing. It was just Unionville. And they just drove down and kind of took a tour of the whole Blue Water area, basically, and they really liked, the St. Clair, and so okay, let's. And then their eyes were open. I do recall when we first got to the area, pulling up in our Volkswagen Bug, which is the only car we had for 9 of us. Was a Volkswagen Bug.
Explain that one.
That was before seatbelt laws, obviously, and we were all little, and I mean, I remember we'd drive up to my grandparents, 3.5, 4 hours away, and it was my sisters, and they had someone on each other's lap. My mom had my brother. Well, when we were both real little, we would sit in the back in those little cubbies, like we'd have our sleeping bags there, and we'd sit on that for traveling, and then we got a little bigger, and then my younger brother would sit on my mom's lap. So really, my dad and I were the lucky ones, because he was driving, he had nobody on his lap, and I was in that little cubby, but sitting on top of. So I had my own little area, but everybody else was stacked up and then we go to church, you look like the clowns in the circus, the door open and they just keep coming out. Yeah, so, but I remember we pulled up and they went and looked at a house. They didn't know anything about the area. They said, hey, and we didn't have any money growing up. And I mean that in the greatest way because we were great parents in the whole beginnings, but, pulled up to this open house at a house on the river. And I'm sure the people were laughing when they saw him pulled up. And there's, I'm sure we couldn't have afforded the whole year salary, probably couldn't afford the taxes on the house, but they didn't know any. But at the time, so that's kind of a nice looking house right on the water. Woo! So yeah, that's when we came down here and then found a nice little house on Thornapple. And
okay, parents still live there?
No, shortly after I graduated, actually as I was graduating, they moved. They sold the house. They were getting ready to move closer to Selfridge, which never really happened. And they bopped around actually in St. Clair from rental to rental, waiting for my brother to graduate, who's 2 years younger than I. And then they moved out to Shelby Township, and now they've lived in Arizona, I don't know, 15, 20 years now.
So where do you fall in line amongst all the kids?
I have 5 older sisters and a younger brother.
Okay. So you're down at the end of
Yep,
the
it was 5 girls and 2 boys.
Okay.
Yep.
And many of them live locally?
I'm the only one left in Michigan.
Okay.
They almost all, also more towards the West Coast, where my parents live in Sun City West, in the greater Phoenix area. My brother and 3 of my sisters all live right within 20 minutes of each other.
So when you go down there for a holiday,
I get to see a lot of them, And then I have one sister in Colorado Springs and one out in San Diego area.
Okay. Now you went to St. Clair High School.
Yep.
And what year did you graduate?
I graduated in 1986.
Okay. So you had Coach Shaw, Coach Monty.
Well, Coach Shaw was girls, yeah, but Coach Monty, Coach Vidakevich.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. What college? Where'd you go to
I went
college?
to Eastern Michigan.
Okay.
Yep.
Majoring?
Originally when I wasn't sure if I was going to go into architecture or education, and I was considering between Eastern and University of Detroit, and because they had a real good architecture program. But Eastern was the only one that had architecture and phys ed available, and so I went there when I was deciding between the two, and I decided to go into phys ed, and I majored in phys ed, minor in English language and literature, which is actually what I started teaching was English classes initially, ELA classes.
When would you say you decided to be a teacher or coach?
I think it was something I always wanted to be a coach. It started with my love of athletics and everything that deals with competition and as you get older, raising young men. But as a young man, you're not thinking in those terms. But I knew I wanted to coach. And then while I was at Eastern, I wasn't 100% sure still which way I was going to go. And then one of my old coaches asked me to come back and help coach while I was still at school. And so that started in 1990. I was doing that. And I said, yeah, this is where I want to go.
So who was that?
That was Ken Thole, who was a JV coach when I played JV, and then he became the head football coach after Vidakevich retired.
Okay.
So I came back and coached freshmen actually with Pete Fox, who was the freshman coach at the time.
Who's still coaching?
Who's still coaching. He's coaching helping JV right now in St. Clair. So yeah, I came and did that for that 1 year, and I said, all right, this is definitely what I want to do. And then, so I didn't coach for a couple years after that because I wanted to get everything done. Because I was running what I called the triangle. My parents at that point were living in Shelby, and I knew I couldn't afford rent in Ypsi while coaching, and I was still working. So I was driving from Ypsi to St. Clair for practice to Shelby to live, and just running that triangle on a pretty much daily basis.
Miles in the car.
And then that was when I picked up a Pinto for my kids. Hate it because I said my third car is only $50. So every time they buy something, I said that's 2 cars or 3. My first car was $100. So I had a Pinto for $50 and. I rattled on, but yeah, so that was, I was doing that daily.
Everybody has a story about a first car. Couple cars like that.
The first few cars, yep. My first one was 100 and that one was 50. So anytime they buy something for $100 or more, even my wife, that's a car and a year of insurance, or if it's 75 now, So
tell us about your wife and children.
I'm blessed. I'm very blessed. My wife, she graduated and she grew up in Marine City. Her father was a drafting industrial arts teacher.
Who I had.
I'm sure.
Clayton,
Yep, Clayton. And her ma had worked once upon a time for Chris Craft for the boat.
Some of that stuff I can tell you as much as you know.
I'm sure.
I'm
sure you know more.
Yeah,
I'm sure you know more. Because obviously I got to know them much later on. In fact, Clayton had passed before I proposed to her.
Okay.
So I asked her mom for permission because her father had already passed. So anyway, she's local, wonderful lady. And then we have, she had been previously married, so had 2 older kids, 32 and 33. And then we have, and that's Justine and Eric. And then now we have 3 of our own together, William, who's 20, Liam, who is 16, a junior, and Madison is 14, and she'll be a freshman next year.
So it's never a dull moment at your house.
No, and I think Madison a little bit. She has Down syndrome, and she's like a cartoon character on with a high volume. So it's always interesting and entertaining in our house. Okay,
so you've got your coaching that has gone on for years, and now you got your kids playing and things like that. So without going through the resume, I can remember you've been coaching at Marine City since am I right, maybe the mid-90s?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. I was at St. Clair first, early 90s to mid-90s. I went to Marine City.
Yep.
Till 2004.
So if I'm gonna jump ahead and I'm gonna make an assumption. You can tell me yes or no.
Go ahead.
I'm going to assume that one of your mentors is Coach Bob.
I think I probably had life mentors. I would say he's certainly my strongest football mentor and one of my strongest life mentors.
Yeah.
Outside of my father, who was probably my best coach mentor and my life mentor. And the gentleman I worked for, Mike Roddy at Paisanos, where I worked when I was in college, kind of a life mentor, taught me a lot of just about everything, kind of. And then Coach Bob, and it's probably almost a loaded question now. Anybody that's coached with him, played for him, has been tremendously impacted by him.
Sure.
And mostly positive. I mean, we all. So, Yeah, absolutely, he's a mentor.
The one question I ran by him, or a statement I made to Coach Bob when I had him in here, was I said, Bob, I said, you got to believe that your fingerprint, your handprints all over this program today. And you know, the self-deprecating Bob says I had a little bit to do with it, right?
Right.
When you and I know how much he had to do with just the whole foundational aspect.
And beyond that, to be honest with you, because if you think about anybody, whether it's football or whoever you are in whatever walks of life you're in, you are a sum of everybody you've encountered.
Yes.
And the greater the sum is based on the impact they had on you, correct?
Right.
So, I mean, people that have never met Coach Bob are impacted by him. Kids, you know,
Right.
my own kids or the kids that I coached and now their kids, without ever even heard of Coach Bob,
Sure.
were influenced by him. And that's not just him, that's anybody that we've encountered.
Yes.
But that's just, like you say, the fingers. Those fingers they go way beyond
Right.
fingers. Those are the capillaries in the fingers.
Right.
It branches out so many times.
Yep. I look at that, and you and I are alike in this one way. I'll say, the adage I was thinking about on my ride up here. What am I thinking with Bill? And I thought, the one thing we have in common is that the idea that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I mean, that,
Sure.
right?
Absolutely.
Whether it's in life or in your English class or waking up early in the morning and
Sure.
doing football, whatever,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So, and obviously growing up in a military family, you probably learned that real early.
We did, and it's funny you say that because out at Selfridge, the people that worked with my dad and eventually for my dad, they referred to my mom as the sergeant because she ran a pretty tight ship.
Right.
She was a disciplinarian, and so yeah, there's a lot of truth to all that.
Well, and you see a lot of it in education from the aspect that I find it interesting because you run into all types of different people. You're a coach, you might run into somebody else that's a theater expert that runs a theater program, you might run into somebody that is an administrator, and they're all in there for the same reason, to make better human beings when they walk out the door. Right?
Certainly hope so, don't we?
That's the idea.
Yes.
So I find that interesting in the scheme of things. Yes, it's important to win. It's important to have a successful program, but it's important to grow these kids into better people.
Right.
Is what it's about.
And that's the true reason why athletics, interscholastic athletics was created.
Right.
And we've lost that way too much in high school and way too much in college. That
Yeah.
whole concept has been lost, at least that's in my opinion. And you even mentioned, like, whether Coach Bob or I'm talking about my mom referring to as a drill sergeant because of the discipline and the toughness, but none of that toughness matters if there's not authentic love in there.
Correct.
There's a lot of different ways to show love. It can be a hug, or it can be you're going to do it again because you're better than that.
Right.
So if it's wrapped in some form of love and it's obvious and it's authentic and it's real, then
Right.
that discipline and all those lessons become meaningful and
Sure.
and people accept them.
Hold people to a high standard
Sure,
for
absolutely.
good reasons
Yep.
behind it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were an assistant coach under Coach Bob,
Mm-hmm.
coached with Ron, coached with Tony, coached with the rest of the guys that are there.
Coached with Darren
Yep.
Pollock, and then Front got hired right before I was leaving. So
Right.
yeah, a lot of those guys.
So then you went to, and I'm gonna without even looking at a piece of paper, I
Sure.
didn't study it, but I think you went to South Lake
That's correct.
for a year or two.
For 1 year, actually. I mean, one football season, about 2/3 of a school year, and then that's when I came back to East China.
And you came back to East China, and then you started coaching football in St. Clair?
That's correct.
Right. So you're head coach how many years?
I believe 12 years at St. Clair, and then one, I think, at South Lake. And
Okay.
I mean, I got a friend that used to do the film for us. He knows all that. He's the historian type of guy. I'm
Right.
more worried about just trying to get things done right.
Right.
But I think it was 12, if I recall correctly,
Okay.
1 year at South Lake.
It's crazy how the time flies, though, right?
Sure does.
You look at this scope of work, and it's usually now going 20, 25 years, or
And when you
whatever.
look back, and the one of very few things I like about social media is you can keep tabs with former players, and you see
Right.
kids that they're, kids you had as players, and it's their 40th birthday coming out. It's like,
Or they
holy
got
moly.
3 kids, or they got
Oh,
kids in
yeah.
high. Now, have you coached or taught kids of your students?
I'm trying to think.
Didn't you?
Yes, I've had.
Okay.
Yep,
A
I've
few.
had. Yep,
A
absolutely.
handful anyway.
Yep.
Yeah. So you coach football. I know that you were like an early riser to put together the weightlifting and the early,
I helped
training
with
for
that.
football.
Sure. And
You
I
did a little
coached
wrestling.
I coached girls when I was at Marine City. I also coached. I was a head girls track coach after
Yep.
being a. So I coached that. I coached wrestling at St. Clair as well, and did track.
Okay. So then you're basically come back to Marine City and you're still continuing to coach football at the high school level.
Correct.
And tell our viewers here what you coach.
I coach offensive line.
Okay.
Yep, that's been primarily my job since I've been back, and I also work with the punters and kickers, some of the specialists. But really, my primary role is offensive line coach.
Okay.
When I came back, it was Ryan Loach's last year, so I kind of worked with him to make sure bring me up to snuff with whether it's the offensive line rules and concepts and all that kind of stuff, and then so I'd be a little more ready to help at a greater capacity once he left.
Now, if you look at a wing T offense that you coach for, in high school, a lot of the accolades go to the running back, the tailback, the quarterback, a receiver, linebacker, but a lot of the accolades don't necessarily go to the offensive lineman.
Right.
However, I'll make the statement just based upon doing Channel 6 games for 22 years. If you got a bad line, not much is going to go good.
That's pretty darn true. You can get every once in a while, as Marine City folks will all attest, you can have a Tyrone Wheatley every once in a while that do a lot on his own, but year in and year out, it's the people in the trenches on both sides of the ball that are going to make hay for you. And when you get against another strong team, maybe has that other star athlete, then what happens in the line of scrimmage is going to dictate the flow of the game.
So, from an offensive line perspective, let's talk about a little more of the nuts and bolts of that. So you've got, obviously, body strength, weightlifting, correct?
Yep.
You've got footwork. Now, when I talk about footwork, I'm not sure that I even know the full idea of footwork, but it's the positioning where the way that you're blocking.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's even that has evolved so much when we talk about footwork, because the footwork used to be thought of as almost the only part of it, and that's the foundation. That's of any athletic.
Okay.
If you're playing shortstop, right?
Right.
To be able to make the turn. I mean, so feet are so important, but the feet are important with respect to getting your hips going in the right direction. So all your, let's get scientific,
Right.
all your vectors are pointing in the same direction
Sure.
to have maximum force and balance when you get there. And so the way we look at footwork sometimes is evolved over time. And we used to always talk about the first step. Well, really, it's the second step that's equally or more important as the first step, because the contact or collision happens on the second step.
Sure.
So if your foot's not down and his is, 2 feet versus 1, so yeah, absolutely the footwork's a big part of it. Hand placement's huge, more so now than it used to be, because it's evolved, and we recognize even a person, let's say, that doesn't bench press. We used to think if you can't bench 300 pounds, you can't. But it's about all the vectors from your wrist through your elbow, through your shoulder, through your hip, in a line, doing it properly. And all of a sudden, a person that maybe is a 180-pound bench presser, but he can be 250 pounds if he's delivering everything in the right way.
Right. Okay.
So all those things, and it's really exciting. And we went a few years ago to Coach Wooster, who was an offensive line coach at Wayne State. Now he's at Grand Valley State, and he sat with all of us, Letson and the whole crew, and really opened our eyes even more so. And then we had Tim Alito with us as well. So,
Okay.
So when you have guys like that are constantly evolving, it doesn't mean schematically evolving, just understanding the biomechanics of the game. It helps you get better.
So let's touch on that subject with Tim. Tim is a local guy that you coached through varsity sports, football. He goes on to play Grand Valley.
That's correct.
Right, 4-year, 5-year player Grand Valley.
He was actually 6 because
Six,
he had 2 medical redshirts,
Okay.
which was amazing.
Yeah.
Because once he got healthy, he never missed 4 straight years of playing. But for the first 2 years, he had major injuries in his lower extremities.
Okay, so he has a, by all accounts, stellar college career. And even at that, you can look at it and say, the kid, the kid's pretty
You used
good,
to
right?
think of him as a kid.
But then you go to the next level and he gets drafted by an NFL team. He plays about 4 or 5 years. 5 years. Plays 5 years in the NFL. Now, obviously, you go to Grand Valley, you know that you're pretty good. But I'm thinking, and I do want to contact him to get him in here to get his view of
Sure.
what's in his head. But every level he went to, he excelled at. But I'm guessing that you're still only as good as your last game, right?
Right. Sometimes your last rep.
Right.
Because that last rep could cause your last game, right?
So you get a guy like that goes to the pros, and he obviously now has so much more training and position coaches that do it for a living 24/7, right?
Right.
So he's probably passed some of that stuff on to you.
Absolutely. I've learned so much from him, more than he ever probably learned from me.
That's interesting. So now the other thing that I noticed was when Tim came back a few years ago, just after his playing days, back when you and I grew up and you saw an offensive lineman, typically they were, 6'2", 320, and they were pretty large.
Mm-hmm.
Tim comes back and he's whatever he might be, 6'4", 280, but there doesn't seem to be much fat on that body.
No, and actually he was when he was playing weight, I think it was around 320, but like you say, he's 6'4", and he could move. I mean,
Right.
that's when I first got hired back at St. Clair as a head coach. My first experience with him was he was a thrower because I got hired in the spring,
Right.
and he was throwing disc for track, and I was helping out, but how quickly and how agile and how much balance and power, meaning how much speed he could generate rotationally moving across the circle. I said, this guy is a true athlete, and he was explosive when he threw it. I said, I'd never seen him play football, but I know he's a football player, and I said, this guy, I just knew he had a high level abilities. I don't know what his goals were at that point, but you can see, so when you're saying these big guys, that he wasn't just a big guy, he's a big guy that could move and he was so coachable. People talk about Tim Lolito or Jake Cronenworth
Right.
or Tyler Mott, some guys, some local guys that have had
Yes.
really great success recently. And every one of those kids were multi-sport athletes.
Right.
Tim was a 3-sport athlete. Jake and Tyler 2 sports, and they also, I'd never heard those kids, and I've been around them while they're playing, while they're around coaches.
Sure.
They were nothing but trying to understand what the coach was trying to get them to do, and then follow what the coach taught. And their parents were the most supportive. What do you need? What do you need? What do you need? It was never,
Right.
my kid's so good, you better give him what he
Right.
needs. It's like,
Right.
give him what he needs as far as give him knowledge, let him get better. And those kids those 3 in particular were so humble and so hardworking, and still are to this day.
Right.
So on top of his physical ability,
Right.
it was his people with confidence.
And
Some people
willingness
think
to learn.
people think those are different, and they're not. A truly confident person has humility. It's the arrogant that hides because you're afraid to be vulnerable. You're willing to be it. So
Right.
I know I got off a tangent, but it's not just the physical, it's all those other things that wrapped up into that person and those types of kids that excel at that level.
Well, it's like I had a discussion with Larry Rombach a couple weeks ago talking about track and field, and you coach with him, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Everybody that's been around has coached with Larry.
Yeah.
We talked about the girl, Lindsay Gerard, who won a long jump first in the state. And he says, if you see the girl in the street, she's just this little girl, and she ended up, I think, jumping like 5 to 7 inches longer in the finals than she had all year. And so that leads to the issue of obviously having the mind and the right focus. But and he says too, she's just a normal kid,
Right.
And like you said, when you saw Tim and you saw something in him, some of that stuff doesn't convey to overconfidence,
Right.
but a confidence with the ability to, listen to a coach, because especially when you look at probably track is probably even different than some others, that you've got a human being that's 40, 50, 55 years old teaching a kid that's 16 years old, So it's got to be a belief factor
Sure.
to get them
Particularly as a coach in track, because there's so many events.
Right.
And I was fortunate to I coached with Larry in football and
Right.
track. But you might be coaching an event that you never ran.
Right.
You
Right.
you weren't a sprinter. You might have been a thrower. You might have
Right.
been a distance kid. You might have played baseball.
Right.
And you learn how to coach track because they needed a track coach. And to get a kid that can flat out run, like I had Andrea Carl, and she wasn't
Right.
one of them, but she's
Yes.
very accomplished athlete, now accomplished coach at SC4. I mean, fortunately they listened because she was a way better runner than I ever was.
Right,
I mean, I
right.
could sometimes run my mouth or something like that and run the dishwasher, but I couldn't run like that.
Well, and what that also leads me into the thought process of that. A lot of times the better coaches are ones that were more students of the game than excelled tremendously.
Oftentimes,
Right.
because sometimes people that excel tremendously get there by ability. Now,
Right.
most of them that get to that high level,
Elite,
it
right.
wasn't just ability, because there's a lot of great, people that we consider great athletes, I should say very good athletes, but
Right.
the ones, even like, I was never a Deion Sanders fan, but I
Right.
appreciated his
Right.
ability. But, he was so fast, but he worked at that speed, and he
to
worked
get
at
that
his
good.
technique and all that stuff. Beyond all the hype and the stuff that I didn't care for, I knew there was a guy that really worked hard and was coachable on his technique and studied the game film and all
Right.
that to get to that level.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. So any defining moments as a coach?
Well, that's a great question. It's not the athletic stuff that are defining moments for you. There's a few of them. One is, and Tony has said this a million times. I'm sure you've talked to you about just the relationships you make with the coaches and the
Sure.
players. But so all those moments you have with coaches behind the scenes of just laughs about silly things that occur. But I always remember, and that was very. We talk about blessings. The challenges you have, things that doesn't make you
Sure.
kill you, make you stronger. I remember when Madison was born. I didn't know anything about Down syndrome.
Sure.
And I just remember talking to my team at the time, and mentioned that she had Down syndrome, and I didn't know if she was how it was going
Right.
to affect our lifestyle. If I'd have to retire, I didn't know anything about it.
Yep.
And so I remember talking to the team about it, and some kids had that. Oh, and I said, never feel sorry for me. I said, God puts in situations for a reason. And if you're feeling sorry for me, it means you don't think I and God can handle it together.
Sure.
And so this kid, Steve Mock, who played for me at the time, he went on to play at Adrian. In fact, the year Kirk Cousins won there's an award for Division I student athlete in the state of Michigan. There's one for Division III. He won it at Adrian. He was Division III Scholar Athlete of the Year in Division III. He had a knee injury, and going into his senior year, and he was just like most people would be. He was
Devastated, right.
And he remembered that talk about don't feel sorry for me, and that he said that picked him up where he got through all that.
Yeah,
To me, that's probably the most powerful moment
Right.
because it wasn't about athletics. It was about it made a kid realize a life lesson that will carry him through everything he's going to use.
Well, and I think I would guess again. You can say yes or no to this, but it's probably pretty cool to walk downtown, go to the parade, go to see things, and people, hey coach, right?
It's nice, but it's funny when I was a coach. Everybody knew Maddie more than me. You're driving during homecoming, and you have to be there as a coach in the car, and everybody's waving to her and screaming her name.
What about me, right?
I didn't care.
Right. That's
But
part
yes,
of
it
the
is
blessing,
nice.
though,
Yeah,
right?
you're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah, you're right. I remember when William was a young 4 years old, 5 years old. He's got a scooter going to his friends, and I was still old school where I think you can get on your bike and go to your friend's house, and all of a sudden you can't let your kids because you're worried about abductions, which
Right,
I
all kinds of
understand.
things, yeah.
But a local parent, in fact, it's Tricia Butland, who's a secretary at the high school. She calls me and says, "Hey, did you know
He's down
William's
here."
out on the? I just saw him at 9th or at Clinton and Kearney about to cross the road. You sure he's?" I said, "Yeah, he's." But looking out for each other.
Right.
So that's the advantage, I guess, of being in a position where people recognize. I don't think it's about the person really; it's the position. Anybody. The current coach has the same courtesies,
Right.
And so, but that was a blessing that because of that, people are looking out for your
Yeah,
family.
yeah.
And
Well, that's
recognize
all
those things.
about being in a small town community like this.
Absolutely.
I mean, and I've said this many times, you can go from Algonac to Marine City to St. Clair to Marysville to Port Huron, and there's a lot of those kind of stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether it's maybe a tennis coach in Port Huron or a cross-country coach in Algonac.
Or an art teacher or whatever else.
Right.
Absolutely.
Anything.
Or, yeah.
Yeah. So, great to have you here.
I appreciate
So
it.
we'll have you again. Tell us, before we end here, you retired as an East China School District educator
Yep.
recently, about a year ago, and you are now working for a different school. So tell us about it.
Yeah, I'm at Austin Catholic High School, which is a small, somewhat upstarted school, started back up 11 years ago, shut down in 78, in Chesterfield Township on 23 Mile Road. I'm director of admissions and enrollment, and it's been great to be in that environment where, and I'm again very blessed. I have nothing but positive things to say about being able to live and work and coach in East China. But it's nice to be in a new situation where you can probably wear your faith a little more on your sleeve, and
Sure.
and you can share those lessons. We talk about life lessons you have with kids. Sometimes in public schools, you're not allowed to use your faith lessons to help impact kids,
Sure.
which to me hampers because you're not using all your tools.
Right.
I understand why some people have concerns about that, but it's nice to be in a situation if I know that this is a kid that's has certain faith beliefs, I can use that to help motivate them or help
Sure.
them understand why it is important to do things the right way, because your faith teaches you that. And that's just, it's nice to be able to do that. And our school, what a great family atmosphere. We have a truly outstanding culture there with our parents and the students that are there, and all the teachers. Everybody's to take something from PJ Fleck. Everybody's rowing the boat in the same direction.
Yep.
And it's really neat.
There's a couple connections.
We got quite a few connections
We
here.
got Janelle Coppins. She's the principal.
Yep.
You're there. Ron Glodich is there.
Ron
and Ron
Glodich.
is teaching a couple classes, and
He's athletic coordinator,
Right.
and he coached basketball this
Right.
last year as well.
then any more?
Chris Redditch,
Okay.
she's been teaching there. Tim Maxwell his position is no longer there, but he's been there for quite a while as a teacher, a faith director. There's quite a few connections there.
Yeah, it's. I find it interesting, and I have had this talk with you and Ron and even Janelle that I know that it's just west of Gratiot on 23. So when you look at the area that it's in, yes, it's an upstart. That maybe 10, 12 years.
Yeah, 11 years now.
11
Just
years?
finished our 11th.
Yeah. So fairly an upstart in education as we know it.
Sure.
But when you look at the growing area, they're talking about in the next year to two of having some new athletic facilities, which would mean expanded programs
Yeah.
for that school.
Yeah,
So-
we're just waiting for the approval from the township. It took quite a couple years of
Yeah.
bureaucracy, and now we had to go back and submit some new plans, just a couple things about where the lights were going to be,
Sure.
and so we're waiting for them to finally approve it, and then the plan is we'll build that behind our facility, which would be outstanding. Again, it's a great tool for our school. It'll be all turf football, and the corner of one end zone will be the baseball field, and the corner, the outfield baseball, and the other
Okay.
corner of the opposite corner of the opposite end zone will be the outfield of the softball field. Everything's turf. So we'll be able to house things
Yeah.
that we have to do off-site now.
Okay.
Not only practice, meta for practices obviously, but also we've had interest. I think we'll have because we have a lot more athletic programming than I think people would realize. We have really 13 varsity sports available, and that's based on what the kids want. We haven't had enough kids that were interested in playing softball yet. And I
Right.
think we're going to have a lot of girls next year that want to play softball based on some freshmen and some sophomore transfers that are going to want to play softball. So it'll be nice to be able to have
Sure.
a facility there on site, and also when kids, that's part of the experience for high school. We'd like to
Right.
say everybody goes to school for academics, but I know when I was a kid,
Right.
I did well in school.
But you
that's
cared
kind
more
of my.
about playing
But
sports.
I liked football,
Yeah.
and I liked sports. I liked everything that wasn't school. I did my best, and I didn't despise it like sometimes
Right.
people do. But that's part of the whole attraction and part of the experience, what makes people enjoy that moment of their life.
Sure. Now, what's the most recent number of kids in the school?
Last year we had 104, which was
Okay.
the largest enrollment. Next year will probably be about 115, somewhere between 100, 110, probably close to 114, 115.
Okay.
Next
So lots of opportunity for growth there.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Especially, like I said, when you draw a circle from Chesterfield, when you look at other schools, other parochial schools, that maybe kids go to Cardinal Mooney or kids go to De La Salle.
De La
or
Salle
something
and even
like that.
Bishop Foley's kids between
Yeah.
the two of us, or Lutheran
Yeah.
North, which is not obviously Catholic, but all the kids that go to these schools aren't Catholics. They're just looking
Yeah.
for certain things that our school provides.
Sure, sure. Well, appreciate you coming in. Look forward to seeing you on the gridiron on Friday nights when we're able to. And
Well,
go ahead.
I apologize. I won't be on the fields
Right.
on Friday. My son, who's a junior, I'll be at his games. I'll be a practice coach during the
Okay.
week, and then I'll be at my son's games on Friday nights.
JV on
Except-
Thursday, maybe?
Yeah, I'll be at JV, and when they play each other,
Right.
then I'll be able to see. I'll be at our games.
And what position's he playing?
He plays wide out, and
Okay.
then I've seen him at some 7-on-7s. He's worked somewhat at an outside linebacker / strong safety hybrid, I think. So
Okay. So you don't have to coach against each other in a sense.
no, not necessarily. But unless he'll probably play more offense, probably more of a wide out. I think my guess is just from watching, he's probably going to be a spot player or backup on defense. But if he's out there, we're going to have an assignment to take care of him.
There
I
you
can
go.
tell you
Exactly. Okay. Good luck and congratulations on all your positions as you've had. We'll look forward down the road and continue to be the mentor that you are to young adults.
I appreciate
You do a
that.
great job.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
If you have anybody else you feel like you want to have here as a guest, the number's on the screen, 586-707-5811. And we will see you next time on In the Zone. Thank you.